Good morning. Good morning. Last week I started to speak about attention, and I want to continue with that. I said attention is our most precious resource. Where your attention goes, your life goes. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the word resource, because the way the word resource is used in our society is like raw materials that can be extracted. But, as I pointed out, we live in an attention economy now where companies have actually found ways to extract our attention, bind it, hold it, like raw materials for economic benefit. So there's a precariousness around attention, I think, that is particular to our time. It challenges us in particular ways that maybe we need to we need to find out more and more about it by studying what's going on. Maybe it's better to speak of attention as our most precious faculty. Most precious because it's most fundamental. If you think about the sense faculties, as we say, you can only bring into consciousness that which receives your attention. To give an example, there is a sound of the air conditioner in here. And as I'm naming it and calling your attention to it, you are bringing it into consciousness. But before, I assume, you weren't really conscious of it. It was there, but you weren't really directing your attention there, so it's there, but it's kind of not there for you. Do you understand? Well, imagine your life. It's like there's a whole lot that is not really there for us because our attention is not going there. Now, if you allow your attention to be rented out by someone else, and this faculty is bound up, it's like it's not really available to bring various other aspects of your life world into consciousness. So this is why I say most fundamental and precious, because our life world, our life path is altered by how we cultivate and conduct our attention. Now, I use the word consciousness here, and I'm conscious of the fact that it's being used in different ways. The talk that I feel I want to give, I'm concerned might be a little bit technical. On the surface, you may feel like, we'll see, because I don't know, it's not scripted, but it's in my mind, prefigured in some way. It might be technical, and Well, I would like you to bear with that because I want to, it's not impractical, but it's almost like I feel like I need to lay out a certain conceptual landscape almost from which then certain practices can be derived. Like last week, someone said, "Oh, we haven't gotten to the how of reclaiming our attention." Yeah, sort of. Indirectly, we have maybe. By the way, I think I've mentioned this too. It's like I notice when I look at certain books that are published naming the attention crisis of our time. This is a word now. There's something is being observed that, then gets named. It's often talked about in the name of productivity. It's like if you can't sustain attention on something you want to learn or something you want to make or something you want to invent, you're not going to learn, make, or invent it. And if we start as a society, if we start noticing that attention jumps around, in what people now call, a fragmented way, I really don't know if it is experienced as fragmented, but it's actually a function of time. It's like there is focus, but it jumps around in smaller and smaller time increments, so it's not sustained. Anyway, that's the observation and the critique and the worry, maybe you can say. It's important. It's like without sustained focus, we are compromised in various ways and, in the end, less productive. So while capitalism is happy to extract our attention as a resource, it's also really worried that we become unproductive. So, but I'm feeling into the preciousness of attention, and the need to reclaim it, re-own it. Not so much from the point of view of productivity and creativity, although that's important, but also from the point of view of sanity and waking up. And psychological problems arise from fragmented attention, and it's so therefore psychology and psychotherapy, are in our society are concerned about sanity too. But there's also the importance of attention for waking up. Okay, so back to, I said attention is a faculty, and you need that faculty to bring things into consciousness. It's like the one way you can feel into that is like, okay, I gave the example of the AC making a whirring sound. When you give attention to something, it's like you're lifting it out from a background. Something comes into the foreground, and what you are not lifting out, it's almost like it recedes into the background. Now, when you start to observe that in any of your sense fields, and just in general how your mind works, it's kind of interesting. Like, we don't have much time for this. We're just using attention as a faculty, and it's kind of hidden from view because it's functioning in everything. A practice you could adopt is to practice a kind of dual mind. It's like there is the mind of the object that's being perceived, that which you lift out. It makes an object, basically. It makes an object of the mind. Oh, and you have names for objects, so we can say AC, but that's just pointing to what you're lifting out. In fact, it's not the AC, it's the whirring sound that you're lifting out. But we can say the AC because, anyway, there's another way of naming it and so forth. Right? You get into how language works. And something else, in fact, everything else is excluded from this focus that you are creating when you lift something out. When you observe that in the various sense fields, you get a feeling for attention functioning. So the dual mind is like there's the object that the attention is lifting out, and then there's the mind, which is kind of the necessary condition for anything to be lifted out. So as you're like walking, as I like to say, this is a wrong metaphor, but because there's no container, but I like to say, as you're walking around in your life, it sounds like life is a container and you're walking. No, that's wrong about it, but it's still a kind of phrase that works for me. As I'm walking around in my life, I'm just noticing there is the objects, the contents of consciousness, and then there is the mind that is the prerequisite for anything to appear. We'll get to that a little later, maybe. Now, you could say, if what you lift out with your attentional focus is what you make conscious, then what recedes into the background, that which is not in the focus, is non-conscious. Right? Like the AC was non-conscious. Now, I prefer the word non-conscious over unconscious. For two reasons. There's a medical definition, you could say, of unconscious, and that's like unresponsive. How do you test that someone is unconscious? They're unresponsive. Like, you talk to them and they're like not responding, right? You hit their cheek, hey, hey, hey. No reaction. Unconscious. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. But there's another way the word unconscious is charged, and it's charged in a Freudian way. The unconscious. Well, Freud had a very particular way of speaking about the unconscious. It's the unconscious is that which is repressed from consciousness. So we all have experiences that are uncomfortable enough for us that we don't want to experience them. And what do you do when you don't want to experience something? So Freud came up with observations of like, oh, you might avoid it, or you might ignore it, or you might be in denial of it. Or you might displace it and pretend that that's not your discomfort, but that someone else is responsible for it. Or you might intellectualize and say, well, it's, you just come up with some kind of rationality which disguises your discomfort. Anyway, you can look it up. Defense strategies, basic psychological understanding of how our mind functions. So then the unconscious is that which is not invited into consciousness, it's repressed. And there's a barrier, like you're going to organize your life to not experience these things and keep your defense strategies in place, etc. Well, I think all of this is accurate observation, and you can modify it and improve it and so forth, and you get an evolving field of psychology and psychotherapy from it, and that's all useful. But there's something more fundamental, and that's what I'm calling non-conscious, is that which isn't attended to. It's not repressed, it's just not attended to. So I just don't want to call it unconscious because it has these other implications that I don't mean right now. Now I think I'm observing that our society, our culture, gives enormous importance to that which is in focus. And not very much importance to what is non-conscious. Like I said, when you don't attend to the air conditioner in the room, or now please, feel beyond the air conditioner. What are you not attending to in your life consciously? Most things. The complexity of our life is mostly unattended to, but it's working behind our back. For example, Buddhism does attend to that which is unconscious, non-conscious, Freudian slip. That which is non-conscious with words like interdependence and impermanence. Interdependence basically points to everything that is working to sustain us behind our backs, behind the back of consciousness. And we're not necessarily attending to it, but we can be aware that it's happening. We have a very global word, interdependence, and it points to something non-conscious. It's interesting to me. Impermanence. William Butler Yeats is quoted with the phrase, the Irish poet, is quoted with the phrase, half of life is loss. This is very profound. And very true, I think. Because the other side of emergence, of arising, of appearance, is disappearance. At every moment. When we attend to something, we are not attending to something else. That's the loss. So impermanence points to the other side of appearance. But just because it's not attended to doesn't mean it's not there. It's gone in a way, but it's also staying present. Like your experience that you have moment to moment is not gone exactly. Yes, it's not conscious, and also it's in the past, but it is present in the way that is shaping the present and the future. You're always carrying the present into the present, so the present that is lost by carrying it forward into another present moment is lost, but also there in the way it has shaped this particular path to this present. So that's non-conscious. But it's pointed to by impermanence. If we don't listen to impermanence just as like, oh yeah, things, perish, which is also true. There's a depth dimension there. Okay, so as a practice, I have presented this many times, but here it is. Again, I make a distinction between focus and field. You can become aware of where your attentional focus is, and you can also release that focus, if you practice this in the visual field, you can widen your gaze, and you can try that right now if you basically look into the whole field of vision, all the way to where your field of vision ends. Look at everything all at once, and nothing in particular. Looking at nothing in particular is kind of like, and this is, language becomes weird at this point. It's like you're making the non-conscious conscious. You're giving up conscious focus, and you're making the non-conscious, you're making the background the foreground. Well, I said, I led this, by saying our society doesn't value the non-conscious, the field. You see it in how we jump from focus to focus to focus to focus, and we have very little time to just, linger in the field. In my 3-year-old, I see it, he gets all excited about this, that, and the other thing. And then he just drops into this trance. And for a moment, nothing's happening. And when I look at him, he's looking into empty space. He's looking at everything all at once and nothing in particular. It's a kind of trance. It's a mini zazen. Okay, so we have this distinction between focus and feel, and you can practice it. You practice it when you practice zazen, because zazen, and I'm not giving particular instructions right now, assuming that you have instructions that you already apply and continually refine for yourself. But anyway, you are releasing focus. There are intermediate steps in this practice of releasing focus, of, maybe we could call it ungrasping. This seems very, the society doesn't value it because it seems very unproductive. You're just sitting around ungrasping. Oh, great. It's not productive. Oh, so it seems on the surface not productive. why do it? Okay, but let's say, there's focus and there's field. There's focused consciousness and there's field, I call it awareness, field awareness. You are aware of everything all at once and nothing in particular. There's two kinds of concentrations that arise from this. One kind of concentration is valued. We're all familiar with that. That's like, we all have the ability to focus. We can lift out a thing. The question is, for how long? If you have trouble with attention, you may be diagnosed with an attention deficit problem. Well, what is that? That means you have a hard time sustaining your focus. It's not like you don't have focus. You have a hard time sustaining focus on one thing, which we already discussed is important for learning, for creating, so forth. Okay, but now there's this modality of mind that I'm trying to talk about that is non-conscious, I say, aware, that is field-like, and we also have this capacity. It's not something you need to acquire. Like I just said, my 3-year-old son has the capacity. He can just drop into it spontaneously. You can do it too. You may not be used to it, so it feels remote, but you have the capacity. It's like I experience this as like it's a basic function of the mind to be either focused or field-like. And go back and forth between the two. And there's something we can also start to explore is integrate them. Notice how focus is always emerging from the field. Okay, so now meditation implies the skill to sustain field-like awareness. In school, you are asked to sustain focus. In meditation, there is a kind of implied, skill that we train to sustain field-like awareness. So actually, there's a bridge. It's like you learn to sustain focus on the breath, let's say, but meditation in the end, is not about sustaining focus on the breath. It's about sustaining attention, which can also open up and become field-like, and then you sustain that. You see, like the sustained breath attention, focused attention becomes a kind of door into sustaining field-like awareness. It's like you bring the breath into focus, and then you give up on that focus and let it become wide. Just the way I said, you can let your gaze become wide. So, sustained field-like awareness is a very different kind of concentration. It's not focused attention, sustained. Suzuki Roshi spoke about this sustained, focused attention as the concentration of a watchmaker. Stay with the little watch that you're going to repair or make. But sustained awareness is having, either in the foreground, but for our daily life, in the background, a sense of the whole field being present in your activity. Okay. In the Q&A last time, there was a question about that I took to point to the the journey of cultivating attention, which is, we discover, I think, as we're doing it, a spiritual journey. I trust you have some sense of what I mean when I say spiritual, because, yeah, we have some sense. I'm not going to define it, although I notice, like, in myself, what does that mean, spiritual? But there's a spiritual dimension. Okay, I've heard that this journey has been described, not my words, I don't know, maybe one of you can help me who said it this way. 4 stages. Absorbed in the contents. Aware of the contents, 2nd stage. 3rd stage, aware of awareness. 4th stage, absorbed in awareness. Absorbed in the contents. Our life is jumping from focus to focus that lift out and make us conscious of contents of life. This, that, this thought, this idea, this belief, this theory, this person, this content, this, and then we identify with some of those contents and we battle other contents. Okay, and then you tire with this. You feel you're going around in circles, and then you take up mindfulness practice, and then you practice to be aware of the contents, which Dogen described as taking the backward step. Oh, it's just like you look at all the contents like clouds in the sky, or as you know, your mindfulness app will tell you, you sit by the river and let the contents float by like leaves. Don't get involved with them. Don't identify, don't battle them, just be aware of them. So, absorbed in the contents, and then aware of the contents. This is the first step in this spiritual journey, or attentional journey, which is a spiritual journey in the end. And then you become aware of awareness. There's the awareness that you have for the contents, and you're not getting involved with them in the same way. That's the practice of non-attachment. And then you become aware of awareness. This is like when I said go through life with a dual mind. There's the object, and then there's the awareness of the object. So you become aware of the awareness. Now, this took me years. Well, intellectually I understand, but experientially it was like, so there's this awareness, right? Well, when you say awareness, you are turning it into content. Do you understand? Nah. You become aware of awareness in your meditation, and then you say, oh, that's awareness. It's gone. Because you've turned it into content. This is tricky business. There you are really challenged to practice ungrasping. So I use the word resting. You just rest there. A lot has to go into that to be able to rest, because I think we feel a certain, I want to say emptiness, but that like has a Buddhist connotation, which is useful and confusing. If we can't grasp onto something, It's terrifying. So the language is sort of hollow at this point. Everyone talks about it, the identity or grasping of the self, or it's like, oh God, what does this mean? But I want you to maybe feel into the anxiety-provoking situation when you can't hold on to anything. You can't hold on to your identity. You can't hold on to your bank account, which shit happens and clears out your bank account, or the stock market crashes. It's like you can't rely on this stuff. But everything is that way. It's terrifying at first. The more and more, it has to become less and less terrifying to be able to rest in open awareness. Because in open awareness, you're not identified with any contents. You do have to ungrasp them. And what emerges is a different way of experiencing yourself. So that's what this third thing is, aware of awareness. It's become aware of awareness, and you are tempted to turn it into content, but you need to learn to rest in it. And then you go to the fourth stage, is in this rendering, is like absorbed in awareness. So, absorbed in the contents, aware of the contents, aware of awareness, then absorbed in awareness. Well, the word absorbed is the same here, but it's a very different way, a very different absorption. There's a whole transformation that has occurred to turn one kind of absorption, which we probably should call entangled in the contents, or captivated by the contents, or thrown around by the contents. Maybe we should call it that. But then it turns into an absorption that is like resting. Now, Buddhism will talk about emptiness. It's like, what is emptiness? Well, you could say an empty mind is a mind empty of focus. Thich Nhat Hanh, in his teachings on emptiness, says like, you need to ask, empty of what? Empty of what? And he says empty of self. But maybe we should try out empty of focus. Empty of this grasp, like to create a focus and lift out a content and name it. Those are all ways of grasping. So empty is empty of grasping, empty of making content. Before I said you make a focus, it's like you make a circle. Inside the circle is what you're grasping. Outside the circle is that which is what I call non-consciousness. What is this? What is this field outside of the circle? Well, you could say it's all the possible foci that you are not focusing on. But this would be incorrect. Because to say it's all the possible foci is already making all the things that are potentially can come in focus. It makes that into separate things. But this field is not a field of many but separate things. It's a field of undivided multiplicity of interconnected aspects that you separate out when you give attention to one aspect. So there's an all-at-onceness that is very difficult to conceptualize. There's an all-at-onceness that works behind the back of consciousness. You still with me?
Yes.
Well, you not only are asked to rest in that, you can start trying out whether you allow yourself to be supported by that. It's out of focus, it's outside of consciousness, and yet it's actually already on your side. So the way this turns into, and then I need to end, I think. I want to encourage you to extend your feelers into this field. And allow the idea that what you might feel separated from, you're already connected with. And then, and this is something that has bugged me for 25 years of practice. It's more now, almost 30 years of practicing Zen. The way Zen talks about spontaneity. You just leave this delicate process, which I'm going to say a little bit more about, you just leave it up to one word. It's like spontaneity. It's just going to happen. And it's not true. There's millions of Zen practitioners for whom it is not just happening. But there's something here that is subtle and difficult to articulate. It's like when you not just rest, but trust in the field. That's a spiritual dimension too. You can start to relax and see what wants to come into focus. There's some kind of deeper logic to your life. Logic. Integralness. Never said that before? Well, let's try it out. Where things appear that may not make sense from the way you usually think, but that have some kind of power. Now, there's spontaneity. There are spontaneous foci that appear. Ways you want to respond, opportunities you feel you have now and should explore. But if you are in a belief system, or if you're driven by your emotions, or if you are held back by anxiety, you may not do any of those things and disregard what the field offers. In a certain worldview, this comes from God. In another worldview, like I'm presenting, it just comes out of the complexity. But there is this there is this openness of attending as a field that is sensitive to foci that you don't just create, but that also come to you. It's important to develop this as a kind of craft. Letting it happen, making it happen. But the more your practice matures, I think, the more you trust to let it happen. But there can be fear, right? Be clear about this. There can be a fear of not being in control. Okay, so we're doing something in our meditation practice, We're inviting this non-conscious field to actually make our life happen. Rather than I'm making my life happen. Thank you very much.